Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, the award-winning cannabis news podcast brought to you by VoteProPot.com. Here are your hosts, Phil Adams, Jay Britton, and Andrew McCreadies.
The vaping crisis. 1 year later, what's going on with that? We'll talk about that. Jay examines the upside of legalizing weed in Texas. And Trump sends a cease-and-desist order to Mississippi medical activists. We have those and a lot of other stuff. But first, as you can see, we have with us today our Chief Health and Wellness Correspondent, none other than Faye Berger Mitchell. How are you, Faye?
Hey. I'm great. How are you guys? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it's good to... You've been a busy girl, right? You've been studying?
I've been studying. Right now, my head is deep in pharmacology.
Deep in pharmacology.
Faye, let's tell our audience. Faye is in the graduate program at the University of Maryland for... what's the major exactly?
It's medical, cannabis, science, and therapeutics. It's the only one in the country.
Only one in the country.
Oh, she's getting a master's degree.
That's
yeah,
right.
Man.
Right.
So how's it going?
Oh, it's really going great. I love it. It's been a long time since I've been in school, so I was a little bit nervous. The interesting thing is, we meet as a group. In our first course, we talked about what our career goals were. And the interesting thing about this is there really are no careers in medical cannabis at the moment. And we have to go out and sort of create our own careers.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, there are the cannabis companies, they're growing weed and they're selling weed, and they really want to make money. So a lot of them, not all of them, but many of them are just waiting for the day until they can sell weed to anybody who walks into the dispensary.
Right. Sure.
And so, and really because it's not legal, it's not as accepted by the traditional medical community. So we have pharmacists in our program, we have nurses, I'm a dietitian, we have a lot of medical people who want to learn this and bring it back to their facilities or to their workplaces. However, again, till it becomes legal, there is not a job that says cannabis consultant or cannabis nurse, or, you're not going to be able to look at the want ads or whatever on Indeed and find a job like that.
Must have a master's in weed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, and how the medical community, really many doctors have not embraced medical marijuana.
Right.
And a lot of them they don't know anything about it.
We had to do an interview. One of our assignments was to do an interview, so I picked a local doctor who I work with, and that was his thing. He said, until this MORE Act passes, his belief is that, it won't go very far with the medical community.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Once the MORE Act passes, and he was very much familiar with all of that, as soon as the act passes, then the research can come. Doctors will not, and other medical professionals will not accept this until you have the research to back it up.
That's their training,
that's their ethical. They have to.
And of course, Faye's talking about the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act that we've been talking about a number of times. That is waiting for the House to take some action on it, and they are talking about making it a priority after the election. We were thinking that it might happen sooner than that, but they keep putting it off. So hopefully after the election, no matter who ends up winning it, they'll get back to work on that. And
I hope so too, because the bottom line is, make it legal, tax it, and we could fix a lot of our problems with infrastructure and education. So, hopefully they'll get to that.
Or don't tax it.
That's
just
great.
Let us.
No. I think the way you're going to get the act passed, though, is there's got to be some kind of benefit there for the people who are going to vote for the act.
Well, maybe there's some politics in there, knowing that the current Senate is never going to sign off on it. So maybe they think, well, let's wait till after the election. Maybe we'll have a Senate that will.
It's
That's
interesting.
True.
One of the things we learned about, and I'm not going to go into detail, but they have this, the scheduling so wrapped up within so many different government agencies, DEA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, the FDA, that in order to make this change, it's this whole laborious process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the alphabet soup of government bureaucracy.
Exactly. Acronyms.
I haven't heard anyone that could accurately describe exactly how who has to sign what document to get legalization done. I really haven't heard a good answer to that.
It's complicated.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andrew, because like Faye says, there's more than one agency involved. But you've got Schedule 1, you've got the DA,
Now,
FDA,
unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided not to take up the case of challenging the constitutionality of Schedule 1. If they had ruled against that it's unconstitutional, that would have gone a long way, because without Schedule 1, I think that's the linchpin in all of this.
Absolutely.
And without Schedule 1, the rest of it, nobody cares about the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's just bureaucratic
It'll work itself
mumbo
out.
jumbo.
And I mean, really, they're talking about there's two issues. Do you want to reschedule it as other drugs are rescheduled? There are drugs. Sure. Drugs have schedules,
right?
Or do we want to deschedule it and then it's legal? Across the board.
Now, currently, the Biden platform is for rescheduling, not descheduling.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
decriminalization and expungement.
Yes, yes.
Kamala Harris, when she ran for the nomination herself, was an outspoken advocate for full legalization. She scaled that back since then, being on the ticket as she is. I think she's trying to send signals to cannabis reform advocates that more meaningful legalization and reform it will be forthcoming at some point.
That's how it is everywhere.
Right now, her running mate is not. It's not a policy that Joe Biden favors.
Right. Well, and honestly, I have to say, as I've read and I've looked into this more, I feel like that's how a lot of the states have gone it. First, it became legal medically. And I feel like that's going to open the door, and then we'll go down to the other end of like, okay, it's legal. But it seems like legalizing it medically is sort of the first step.
Yeah.
Consistently it is.
Now, tell me how you view that, Faye, because you're looking at this from very much a medical marijuana standpoint. There's a lot to be said for the idea that medical should come first, because people who need it as treatment should be able to get it, and it should be treated as medicine. Because for a lot of people, it is medicine. We were joking about a Montana, I think it was Montana or South Dakota, where they had two ballot initiatives, one to make it illegal or make it legal for recreational, one to make it legal for medical. And we were considering there was possible that the medical get voted down, but the recreational gets passed. And it's like, well, you could use marijuana all you want, as long as you're not using it for medicinal purposes.
Well, and actually, you're right, Phil. And that's the thing. I hate to be the buzzkill here, but I really would like to see it legalized medically first. I definitely am concerned about all the people who are in jail because of, stupid cannabis offenses that they did nothing. And that needs to have something done about it. But even the doctor I spoke to when I did my interview fears that if it just becomes legal across the board, the medical dispensary is just going to go by the wayside. And yet, it's real medicine. So it just seems like maybe the stepping stone is the way to go.
Well, maybe that will create a new profession for folks like you to be medical cannabis consultants. Outside of the dispensary.
Right.
Well, that's what I want to do. My goal is actually to do individual medical consulting to people. A lot of them are elderly. They don't know what they're doing. And, they need information on dosing and all of that. And if you go into the dispensary, man, they're going to tell you this stuff's going to get you high, And as a matter of fact, I just had a story. Somebody told me that, like they went into the dispensary, they wanted to ask some questions. She wanted it medically. And this guy just kept talking about how high it was going to get her.
Oh, no.
And so they need me. They need people like me, but they don't know it.
Well, it's interesting. When they made cannabis legal recreationally nationally in Canada, a lot of there's medical dispensaries that stayed open. And I read an interview with one of the doctors at this medical dispensary in Canada. He goes, everyone who walks in, really needs medical help, because if they just wanted weed, they can go down to the corner and get it at the dispensary.
Right.
Right.
So they're just not getting any consulting or expertise from it.
Right.
So I think the demand's going to sort of create something.
Yeah,
I
don't
so.
know how that.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to look like, but there's still going to be a demand.
Well, there's still a part of the population, I think, in the realm of legalization that feels, incorrectly in my opinion, and probably yours too, that medical is just a vehicle to get it legalized.
It's just the nose of the camel inside the tent.
And they may not even believe, because of the lack of research and the lack of, evidence to a point up until recently, they think, people just want it medical because it's easier to get through, and then everybody just wants it to get high. But they don't realize that, and they will realize because of all the studies that are going on now and we're seeing studies every week.
But the thing about it, Jay, we were just talking about this. Both statements are true.
Right.
We are asking to get it medically because we want to get it done recreationally. I mean, that's a proven fact. And we just said, you don't get it recreational until you go medical first, and before you get medical, you got to go decriminalization,
Well,
but if you bypass the medical and you just go to the recreational, on the other hand, need Faye is the point.
Well,
I know, but it still has medical benefit.
Maybe I can start a cannabis clinic. But actually, in Massachusetts, when it became legal recreationally, they did give some preference to the actual patients. Because otherwise, why would anybody register as a patient?
Right.
There are hefty fees to register. You've got to pay to register. You've got to pay the doctor.
I just renewed mine today.
I renewed mine a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I went to renew mine today, but we'll talk about that in a little while.
Sounds like a story to me.
So, you guys might remember that when Faye first joined us, what was that, back last summer, right? Just the end of the summer?
I think it was last September, actually.
And what was the news story? Everything else has been drowned out by COVID.
Yes.
Since then. But what
politics.
was the and politics? And what was the big news story back then with regard to cannabis?
It was the vaping crisis.
It was vapes.
And we're all freaking out about the vaping crisis. And it's really interesting because there's a website called Project CBD. And it's a really good website, legitimate, good articles written by, educated people. So I use that a lot. But it's written for the average individual who can understand what's going on. So they did just sort of a summary of the vaping crisis 1 year later. And, if you remember correctly, initially they were talking about it was this vitamin E acetate. Remember that? So that was the first thing they talked about. And actually, just to go back a bit, as of February 2020, there were 68 deaths and 3,000 hospitalized. But then COVID hit and they stopped counting.
Right, because that's nothing at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
68 deaths.
First it was the vitamin E acetate, and the FDA found vitamin E acetate in the vape products they tested, and they also found it in the lung fluid samples of the people who were having these issues. But then some of the experts questioned whether that was it, because the lungs looked more like chemical burn injuries.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
So then, remember that? And so then they started looking at other things, and they looked at the vape oil additives. And so what happens is they looked at the thinning agents. Remember we talked about propylene glycol?
Propylene glycol, yep.
Yeah, and there's another one. And then they talked about the flavoring additives, which, here's the interesting thing with that. They're approved for consumption by the FDA, these flavoring additives, and a lot of them are in the e-cigarettes, right? Yeah, but they're approved for oral consumption, but they're toxic when you inhale them. So, everybody loves the flavor, but they're inhaling toxic stuff.
Wow. Well, it's the same thing with the vitamin E. Vitamin E is perfectly good. You rub it on your skin, you put it in your food, it's in your Cheerios, but you don't want to breathe it.
Exactly.
It, burn it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they did find that, the flavorings were toxic to the white blood cells. And that's where they talked about that popcorn lung we heard about. And it was just, it was crippling and it was faithful. So it was just a certain thing that happened in these people's lungs that was, in some people was fatal. They died. So then they looked at synthetic cannabinoids, which could potentially be lethal. Now, these synthetic cannabinoids are used for research, but somehow they became a street drug.
Right.
Okay. So, really they thought really what they're thinking is the bottom line is it was probably a combination of all of the things I just spoke about.
No kidding.
But it's really bad actors who make fake cannabinoid oil. They use thinning agents, the propylene glycol. Then they spike it with their flavoring, a small dose of their potent flavoring and their synthetic cannabinoid. And the whole combination is just deadly, basically.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
So, so the bottom line is what we were saying last year is it's the unregulated markets, and that in the states where cannabis is legal and regulated, you can get a good quality vape product.
That's right.
So
And that's what we were saying a year ago. It was the black market, and exactly what you say. And
That's
there's
what we said.
nothing to be worried about if you buy your vape cartridges from a reputable, state licensed dispensary.
Right. So legal, regulated cannabis
Are safe.
reduces the use of dangerous products.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Bottom
Very
line.
good point. That's another point, additional point.
Yeah. So, that's it. That was the bottom line. And it's like we kept saying that, and we it made sense because I remember back then I talked about how, all of the companies, they didn't, they were testing and they had put out all kinds of reports with toxicities and they weren't there.
Right.
The legal companies, the cannabis companies.
So the bottom
So if you
line
wanna
is if you
save
go
lives-
buy a vape at your
Bottom line is
dispensary,
legalize it.
you're safe, right? Yeah, legalize it. Exactly.
Legalize it.
Legalize, regulate.
Back to vote pro pot, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we were talking earlier about this, and one thing I've learned since we started this podcast is that cannabis has some incredible uses for it. I mean, medically and recreationally. I mean, it can be fun, but it doesn't come without without problems. Some people can have a problem with cannabis, and cannabis can cause challenges for some people.
Absolutely.
And so, so it's not a panacea for every illness, and I think we have to realize that. And so I was thinking, so when you sell cannabis legally, should there be a warning label on it? And if so, what should that
is a
warning
great
label
question.
say?
Well,
I mean,
and
what should it say?
that's going to go back to the regulation, right?
Okay.
So what should-
Regulatory.
What should a warning label
Well,
for
I have
cannabis
an idea of what
say?
one could say. I think it should say, dude, man, if you got shit to do, go with a sativa.
There you go. There you go. I mean, we don't even know what that warning. I mean, it could be just, do not use this without the recommendation of your physician. However, none of the physicians know how to recommend it. So,
Well, they don't say that about alcohol.
No, they don't. You're right. You're right.
Well,
Are there
alcohol
warning
has a
labels
warning-
on?
alcohol? You have warning labels on cigarettes. You have warning labels on lots of stuff.
All right, so put a
Interesting.
warning label on it. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be used by underage,
Absolutely.
teens and
yeah.
children, obviously. And it's just like Andrew said, it's not without its risk. We shouldn't pretend that, it's risk-free and the cure-all for everything.
That's
It's
exactly why.
certainly not.
That's exactly why I went into this program, because I had these little sort of nagging doubts that I should not be just telling everybody to take this medicine, because there's got to be people who shouldn't.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, and
Yep.
True.
that's why this program it's so great it exists, and people are learning about this.
Well, I'm going to be very interested to see. And when you have your graduation, you got to send out invitations, because the three of us, and I'm committing you guys to going
Absolutely.
to Faye's graduation
I
when
don't
she
even
gets
know if
that.
I have one.
Oh, we're going to do a steak dinner.
There you go.
Okay.
Graduation.
We'll do a steak
Yeah.
dinner, and we'll have a
Okay.
special episode for
Okay.
our chief health and wellness correspondent. By the way, now the one who usually does all the state updates for us is Jay. You don't have your usual raft of state updates. There's a lot going on in the states, but right now there's only one state you're looking at,
Well,
right?
I saw this article today in the Dallas Observer by Simone Carter, and this has I'm throwing this out to our buddy James, our fan
James, what's up, James?
It's about Texas, and what it is
It's always nice to hear from our fan.
a new report released Monday by Vincetti Setterberg LLP, which is a national firm specializing in cannabis law and policy. They issued this report. This is for Texans. It says, according to the report, legalization in Texas would bring in sales of approximately $2.7 billion annually. Okay. It would create 40,000 new jobs. That's just direct in the industry. That's dispensaries, growers, processors. That doesn't account for tens of thousands of other jobs, likely.
All the ancillary
all the ancillary
industries,
stuff, real estate and construction trades and tourism and whatever else. The
HVAC.
state would rake in more than $500 million a year in taxes and revenues. $500 million.
It's a lot of dough.
And if and it would get rid of low level possession.
So, do you think people like money
No.
down in Texas? No.
I think it's Texas is not the issue. Is the politicians. I mean, they've got a governor down there who finally legalized hemp, signed a bill to legalize hemp, and then he added a regulation to it that you can't smoke hemp. I mean, come on. So,
Shut up.
speaking of, before I close that segment out, just thought I'd throw out there that we've got this election in 1 week. 1 week from today. We're going to release this on Tuesday. So you got 5 states with initiatives on there, addendums, initiatives, whatever they call them in your state.
Okay.
South Dakota, we talked about,
Dakota.
Montana, Arizona, New Jersey, and Mississippi. So if you're in one of those states, you don't, like Andrew made the point last week, doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you're voting for Bush or Bush. You're voting for Trump or you're voting for Biden.
Bush isn't running, Jay.
Oh, okay. Smoke the big
That was a
fatty
long
before
time
the show.
You can write them in.
You can write him in. That's right.
Don't
think
write him in. Let me tell you, he's a disaster.
I think Billy Bush is still looking
Hogan
for a
wrote
job.
Reagan in.
He did.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
Do your Reagan there.
Reagan's dead.
Well, I think Billy Bush is looking for a job still.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
So if you're in South Dakota, Montana, Arizona, New Jersey, or Mississippi, vote yes. Look it up. Go online and figure out what the name of
And I almost hate to say this, but New Jersey's looking pretty good.
It's looking real. They're all looking good.
They're all looking pretty good, but I'd still hate to say it because that, as soon as I do that, people go, oh, I don't know. Yes, you do. You need to vote.
You need to vote. Absolutely. But they're all they're all looking good.
I think with all the issues that are on the ballot, not really issues on the ballot, but everything that's going on this political season, and it seems like it's so overwhelming. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we should look at it and be proud that I think this election, this November 3rd, cannabis is going to be the big winner.
Yeah.
I think across the
Yeah.
board,
I think it
cannabis is
will.
going to win.
I think all 5 of these are likely. The big question to me would be South Dakota, whether they go for the medical or the recreational adult use or both.
Or both.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to
Right.
see that. But
Interesting to see how South Dakota
According to
comes along.
Yeah, but I really think
all
that
5 are
cannabis
looking
is going to be the big winner this election.
I
day.
think that's a great point.
And we want cannabis to keep on winning.
Now,
Amen.
although, let me say something about
Is that a reference to
Mississippi.
Trump?
Apparently,
My Trump friends will appreciate that.
there is a group in Mississippi, a pro-cannabis group, that are trying to get conservative Republicans to vote yes for legalization. And they were using the president's name. And the Trump campaign issued a cease and desist order to the marijuana advocates in Mississippi to stop saying that the president, to stop using his name for their.
Wow.
Now, what was
Promotion
the
of the
context that they were using it? How were they using it? Were they claiming that he was for it?
Wasn't for it, yeah.
They're claiming that Trump was pro-cannabis?
He said that the president was in fact in favor of medical cannabis reform.
Okay. Well, I guess he's not then.
I guess he didn't.
I mean, if
Well,
it's,
I don't.
But I'll tell you, if you live in Mississippi and you want to vote for Trump, that doesn't mean you can't
Exactly.
vote yes for the ballot
That's the
initiative.
point I was trying to make.
Exactly.
Right.
You can vote for whoever you want to for your county commissioner, your president, whatever. But because if you vote for a Democrat for the county commissioner, that doesn't mean you can't vote, or Republican can't vote yes for the addendum or the whatever it is, the ballot initiative. So.
Well, there's a lot of folks, and our friend James was one of them, that are kind of on the fence, and my brother's another one, where the Republican is anti-cannabis and the Democrat is pro-cannabis. And, ballot initiatives aside, if you're a conservative and a Republican, whom do you vote for in that situation? Do you vote this one issue? I think, our advice to James last time was, there are a lot of one issue voters, and that's fine. This may not be the hill you want to die on, though. If you're for conservatives and Republicans, but on the other hand, like we said, there's a lot more to vote for than just this guy versus that guy. There are ballot initiatives. There are all kinds of things. So,
but the issue we've seen in a lot of states is they'll pass an initiative, for example, but they've got a conservative Republican governor or legislature that makes it a freaking pain in the ass because they won't pass the regulations. They kick it down the road, or they make it so ridiculous you have to be on stage 4 cancer to get it. Those kind of things.
Right.
So,
or they drag it out because they still have to write the bill and they have to pull out the legislation.
Right, and 2 years later, it's still languishing.
Yeah. They're still debating over what the specifics are.
And that's why
it took Maryland 4 years to get the program up and running.
I
and
highly
Ohio
recommend,
a lot longer than that.
Highly recommend you go to normal.org/election, and you can go to your state. And if you're thinking, I think I might vote for this person, they have it spelled out there what their stance is, and they give them a grade with regard to legalization. It'll say Joe Smith is a Democrat, but he gets a C-, and here's why. Right. So it's really helpful if you're going to the ballot in a week and you're not sure who to vote for or why, and that's a really important.
Right. Don't assume that the Republican candidate is necessarily against it. Don't assume that the Democrat is necessarily for it.
I mean, Biden got a C- or D. So,
and you can also go to those generators where you can send a note to your congressperson.
Absolutely, they have that on
So
normal as well.
I did that and I received letters back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So this is all to say, get involved, stay informed. You can go on to VoteProPot.com, check out our get involved page, our take action page, it's called. And we've got lots of links and ways that you can get involved, find out who your representatives are, what their stances are, what the lay of the land is, and make an informed choice. Also, while I'm at it, do us a favor. If you have a moment and you get the chance and you have the idea to do so, go on to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. It really will help us get the word out, and it'll make you feel better. It really will. I promise you. I did it, and I felt better
immediately.
So just tell us a friend, and if you're watching this, you probably don't need to hear this. But if you're one of the many who are listening to the audio portion only, you can see us on YouTube. There he is, right there, and so go on to YouTube, subscribe to Vote Pro Podcast, click on that little bell icon so you'll get notifications whenever the new episode is up, and you won't miss a one of them.
There you go. Beautiful.
All right. Yeah. So, I was doing my weekly DC Weed Talk News DC report for our friends at Pro Cannabis Media. And one of the stories I was talking about was a law that is awaiting Virginia Governor Northam's signature to prohibit, and following basically what Maryland did a few months ago, prohibiting warrantless searches and seizures based solely on the odor of marijuana. You won't be able to do that. You can't do that in Maryland. You won't be able to do that in Virginia. But there's a lot more to the weed smell issue, and there are lawsuits going on that have nothing to do with searches and seizures.
There's lawsuits all over the country where private residents or businesses are suing their neighbor, who was either growing cannabis or processing it due to the odor. And we've seen these cases all over. Well, I read an article today in Oregon. This is from the U.S. News and World Report, actually. There was a company called Smira Vineyard and Macera Winery, and they're located directly next door to a business that's growing weed. Okay, and so they sued them because they said not only is the odor going to be objective, but we're worried that it's going to ruin our crops because the smell will get into the grapes and then it'll make the wine taste funny. Long story short, they lost the lawsuit. Finally, it was settled. The judge came to the conclusion that you don't have the right to do that. But what was interesting mostly to me about this, I didn't know this, and this may be the case in other states, they have a law. They have a law in Oregon called the right to farm law. And that law was written back in the early 90s, but the law protects growers, any farmer, doesn't matter what you're growing, corn, tomatoes, or cannabis. It protects growers from court decisions based on customary noises, smells, dust, or other nuisances associated with farming. So the judge came down and said, look, this falls within this law that we wrote 30 years ago.
Right. He's applying the law.
It says right in the law, smells. So, if you have a tractor that makes a lot of noise, you can't sue your next door neighbor for that. Well, so...
Too bad.
Yeah, we'll see.
What about onion fields or garlic fields or cabbage fields?
Have you ever lived near?
Exactly.
Have you ever lived downwind? I used to live downwind when I was a little kid. We lived in Long Island, and there's a lot of farming done in Long Island. At least there was then. And in my neighborhood, there was a farmer that every few years they would plant cabbage. And let me tell you something: cabbage stinks.
Really? When it's growing?
Oh,
Yeah, when it's growing, you can smell it. When it's big, the leaves, you can smell it down the block.
No kidding.
It was awful. But, too bad. If it stinks, it stinks.
I guess you got to move.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, we did. But it wasn't because of the cabbage.
We're out of Long
So let me
Island.
ask, do you
my
eat
dad's
cabbage?
job. No, it stinks. I can't stand it.
Way too cabbagey here.
I never liked cabbage or cooked cabbage. I never liked St. Patrick's Day. Because we come home and my mom would be making corned beef and cabbage, and I'm like, oh God, is this what we're having?
I love that.
That didn't happen in my house.
So do you think some of these lawsuits against these marijuana companies about the smell may not be only about the smell? Some of them are just against cannabis.
Yeah, it could be.
I bet they are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sure.
It wouldn't surprise me. Put it that way.
I mean, there still is a big stigma associated with cannabis. As far as we have come, there is really a lot of stigma. And, people make jokes when I say that I'm, in the cannabis industry. We have a lot of federal workers in this area, and the stigma still exists. And that's another thing we all have to work on.
And there's no amount of data sometimes that can penetrate that. It's that people believe what they believe, and there's nothing you can get around with that.
It's so entrenched into the culture. It may be a generation or two before it really goes away,
Well, I think it's starting to, though.
Oh, it's starting to, no question.
And Andrew talks about the light at the end of the tunnel. I think he's absolutely right. Some of the things that we complain about now, we're glad to have those problems now because, 5 years ago, this stuff was unthinkable.
Right.
Yeah, it's not as big of a deal with the millennials. I think it's more like, some of my friends smoke weed, some of my friends, drink. It's not as big of a stigma. It does not seem to me in that generation.
Yeah, for example, Andrew had a story last week about younger, teen and young adults are turning away from alcohol to a large extent and, smoking weed instead. And there's some other, Andrew,
it's a healthier option.
Yeah, you have some other data to share with us about teen marijuana use.
Yeah, they came out with another study. Just came out and said, and they studied the 11 states that cannabis has been legalized, recreational cannabis, and they found that it did not affect teen use. And in fact, in Colorado, since they legalized cannabis recreationally, teen use has gone down. And they also did a study, and they compared it to they say, does legalized cannabis have an effect on traffic accidents? Now, they did a study on fatalities, and really the year that they legalized cannabis in California, the traffic fatalities were less than they were the year before. So I think what it proves that it has very little or any effect on traffic fatalities or teen use.
Right, it's a non-factor. Well, you can hire a research group to come up with whatever conclusion you want to reach, and sometimes these studies have predetermined conclusions, and that's just a fact.
I was looking at one just today, and it was funded by Canopy, the big cannabis company.
Yep.
So you do have to look at who's funding this study.
All the government studies in the 70s all came back saying, cannabis is going to cause you to use heroin and,
I can tell you why. The National Institute of Drug Abuse, which did all of the studies, their goal or their purpose is to talk about drug abuse, to talk about the harms, not so they're biased as to what studies they, conduct and publish.
Well, that's why studies have to be reviewed by professionals, doctors, whoever, and study how this study was done. And it's way beyond my understanding, but right? You just say a study that somebody didn't publish.
Making my head explode.
I'm doing a study tonight. You see, as it happens. Well, I don't know. I'm going in for surgery on my leg, and before I go in, I'm experiencing a fair amount of pain, and some days it's pretty bad. So the doctor I mentioned to the doctor, and they gave me a opiate painkiller.
All right.
So I took one before the show, and I'm starting to feel it right now.
I was wondering. That's your study?
Yeah, my study is I'm going to, after the show, I'm going to smoke the last half of this pre-roll, and I'll get back to you next week.
All right,
good.
All right. We'll check up on you.
Actually, there are
keep
studies.
us posted.
Actually, there are studies that show that cannabis use does reduce opioid usage. With people with pain. So yeah.
Well, Phil and I went to an event, a cannabis
seminar.
expo, seminar. And the doctor said that actually just a little bit of cannabis greatly increases the effectiveness of opioids.
Right, and lessens the possibility of developing a tolerance. So there's also a study, and Faye, you can speak to this, regarding patients with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's studies and there's research. And a study's more like looking at what people are saying or what people are doing.
Survey,
yeah, sort of a survey. And so, this survey study said that 42% of patients with MS are using cannabinoids or cannabis-based medicine in one way or another. But 90% of them said it was used medically. And what they were using it for was to improve their sleep, reduce the tremors, and help with nausea and anxiety.
Wow.
So which is
40%.
a lot of people use cannabis for that.
That's right.
But the overwhelming majority of them expressed that they wanted to receive more guidance from their healthcare providers on cannabis use, back to what we were talking before earlier. Yet fewer than 1% receive that type of information from their provider about the type of product they used. And yet again, what was the bottom line of the study? We need more research and personalized evidence-based guidelines.
Right.
You know what I think? What specifically I think we need to research, and that is the differences in strains. And we have to realize, some people said, I used cannabis to treat this and it worked great, but if you don't use the same strain every time or a different strain, it's not going to be as effective. That's what we need to do. And I think you have to realize that it's a holistic medicine, and it's not going to be precisely the same. We're not even
at the terpene level yet. We need more studies just about the plant. And then, there are some studies how the terpenes interact.
A pharmaceutical has to be precisely the same every time.
Exactly. But cannabis is not created equal.
A bud from the top of the plant and the bottom of the plant are going to be a little different.
Right.
Well, and that's what makes it so difficult to use as a medicine, because how do you dose it? It's different, and how do you,
Do you know,
that's the issue.
Have there been any studies on a correlation between using cannabis as an MS patient? Has there been any research, I should say?
Well, I haven't. I'd have to look that up. I really don't know.
I'm sure there has.
What's happening with research is, you all know this. There's only the weed that's grown at the University of Mississippi is the only cannabis that they can get for research. And again, that process of just obtaining it for research is this impossible bureaucratic thing.
And it sucks.
Now, there are companies in some of the states like Colorado, some of the companies are beginning to fund their own studies and real studies with real scientists. So we're just on the brink of that.
Right. And along with the MORE Act, there is also legislation pending in Congress that will allow researchers to use any medical grade cannabis that they can get from a dispensary in their research. And I think that is just as important as passing the MORE Act.
It's key. I mean, because if you're studying a substance that doesn't bear any resemblance to what the patient or person is going to get, it's of no use. Right. It's no use.
I do want to mention one last thing before we go. Halloween's coming up, and definitely don't give your weed to any kid. Don't fucking dose any kids. Yeah, man, let those kids get their own weed.
And they will.
I don't think they're trick-or-treating this year.
That opiate's kicking in.
I don't think they are. No apple bobbing.
No, definitely no apple bobbing. Well, folks, we are very happy that you've joined us for another exciting episode of Vote Pro Podcast, where we're thank you to our Chief Health and Wellness Correspondent, Faye Mitchell, for being with us today. Glad to have you.
Fun to have you. Fun to be here.
Great times. If you like the show, as I said before, go on to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating, tell a friend about us. Go on to VoteProPot.com, send us a message, and Jay is going to run with this next part. Go.
Send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com. Call our message line at 240-257-2441. Drew.
Just get out and vote. Plan your vote. Do a vote. Go register to vote. Just fucking vote on everything, man. Just vote. vote.
Couldn't have said it better
Other
myself.
than that, if you want to find out more about marijuana and the cool things going on in the industry and the legislation, we share a lot of information on our social networking platforms. So please go to Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter and just do a search for Vote Pro Pot.